Welcome to the Institute of Aquaculture's Big Fish series seminar, Blue Food, a Food System Solution. Before we start, and while we wait for others to join, can I invite you to interact with us by using the Q&A box, please? Questions can be directed to points raised by the panel of the BFA papers, and our panelists behind the scenes, or some of the authors of the papers, will do their best to address these questions in real time. And we'll also have some time later in the seminar to follow up on key issues arising with the 5-person speaker panel. Please upvote any questions that you're really interested in. My name's David Little, and I'm at the Institute of Aquaculture, University of Stirling, and I'll be hosting today's event. Today, our panel will explore blue foods. Are they a food system solution? We start with a short video in which Beatrice Kroner provides an overview of the Blue Food Assessment, a joint initiative of the Stockholm Resilience Centre and the Centre for Ocean Solutions and Centre of Food Security and the Environment at Stanford University, and EAT, that brings together over 100 scientists from more than 25 institutions around the world. We'll then hear brief perspectives and opinions from voices around the world from those whose lives are dependent on seafood.
Hello, and thanks for tuning into this brief overview of the Blue Food Assessment. My name is Beatrice Kroner. I'm a professor in sustainable food systems at Stockholm University, and I'm the co-chair of the Blue Food Assessment, together with Ross Naylor, professor at Stanford. As part of the Blue Food Assessment, of course, we've also had a group of extremely competent and dedicated researchers from more than 25 institutions around the world. So before we get started, just to all be on the same page, by blue foods, we mean animals, plants, and algae or seaweed cultivated or captured in freshwater and marine environments. And the Blue Food Assessment came about really because of a perceived need to address aquatic foods in the many discussions about sustainable food systems that are now emerging. And of course, there's a vast and thriving body of blue food scholarship already out there. And the Blue Food Assessment does not claim to be an all-encompassing comprehensive assessment, but it does aim to fill some important gaps in our understanding of the role that blue foods can and do play in food systems globally, now and in the future. Now, the contribution, I think, really lies in trying to take an integrated look at environmental, nutritional, social justice issues related to blue food production, consumption, and trade. And the Blue Food Assessment examines the environmental constraints to and impacts from blue food production. It highlights the diverse nutritional benefits that we can expect from blue foods and explores future demand of blue foods and the implications of this for sustainability and nutrition. We also examine issues pertaining to justice, livelihoods, and equality in a blue food context. And finally, allow ourselves to think a little bit outside the box regarding what's needed for blue and arguably other food systems to transform. I think the transformative potential of blue food lies in its potential contribution to improvement across these 3 domains or dimensions: environment, health, and social equity. And if we start with health, for example, blue foods provide much more than protein. Most of them are rich in other micronutrients, and many supply daily recommendations of omega-3, vitamin B12, and calcium, for example, in just one serving. So in doing that, they can reduce micronutrient deficiencies and improve cognitive development and maternal and child health particularly. And they can also provide a healthier alternative to particularly red and processed meats, and therefore contribute to lowering the risk of cardiovascular disease in some contexts. So a modest investment in expanding global blue food supplies could therefore yield fairly significant returns for global health. On the environment side, many of the most widely produced fish and invertebrates have less negative environmental impacts than terrestrial meats. And there are major opportunities for also further improving these blue food production practices and therefore reducing environmental impacts. And of course, we can also improve by shifting to species with even lower environmental footprints. I'll get back to that. But the single most important step in reducing the amount of feed needed to produce at least aquaculture of 1 pound of fish of a farm fish the single most important step is reducing the amount of feed that's needed to produce a pound of fish. And what Blue Food Assessment research has also shown is that shifting to soy that's produced without deforestation can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 54%. So in summary there, sustainably produced, then Blue Foods can contribute to food systems achieving global goals for climate, land, water, and biodiversity. Finally, and when it comes to social and economic roles of Blue Foods, of course, Blue Food systems are a cornerstone of many rural and national economies. And while large-scale fisheries and aquaculture are and will continue to be important for producing and distributing Blue Foods at affordable prices, it's also true that the small-scale sector currently employs some 800 million people and therefore represent about 90% of the jobs in the Blue Food sector. So safeguarding these important social and economic aspects of Blue Foods is really important and can be done. And what Blue Food Assessment research shows is that countries that have done this and adopted policies to address inequities in Blue Food value chains have actually made a real difference. Now, a key theme that emerged from the Blue Food assessments is the tremendous diversity that we see. And by that, I mean diversity in species and taxa, diversity in nutritional content and contribution to human health, diversity in production modes and therefore in environmental footprints, and of course, diversity across Blue Food systems in terms of their susceptibility to climate change and diversity in current demand that we're seeing globally today. Now, when we look to capture the synergies between the multiple benefits that Blue Foods provide, it is this diversity that offers opportunities to simultaneously work towards multiple goals. And in the BFA, we identified the four following areas, at least. First of all, human environmental health. Now, this synergy can be achieved by developing the production, processing, and use of small pelagic fish, for example, or shellfish aquaculture. Both of these are rich sources of nutrients and have low, and in the case of shellfish, even positive environmental impacts. Another win-win can be between health and livelihoods. The investments in aquaculture innovation can yield systems that produce affordable, highly nutritious food that's also more sustainable, and in doing so can actually provide dignified livelihood opportunities. There's also possibilities for synergies between economic development and nutrition. So here, if we think about thoughtful investments in sustainable industrial fisheries and aquaculture so that they can exploit the production potential of offshore areas and thereby generating revenues from trade, create jobs, produce affordable, nutrient-dense foods, that's a win-win. But the key here is that these investments need to be thoughtful and considered. Finally, then, between livelihoods, equity, and resilience, we see that valuing the diversity of skills and knowledge that's encompassed in the small-scale sector, and also enabling small-scale actor capabilities to innovate and adapt to changing environmental and economic conditions. Doing that means countries can increase both the equity but also the resilience of their aquatic food systems. But of course, Blue Foods are not a silver bullet. They're not a panacea, and there are trade-offs that will have to be navigated. An obvious one is that between generating export revenues versus producing nutrition for domestic markets. And that's invariably going to create a tension. Also, as we see fish being promoted as, or Blue Foods being promoted as healthier or more sustainable options, that will drive demand, that may drive up prices and then heighten this tension. So we mustn't lose sight of it. Also, there's tension between efficiency and diversification. So large-scale producers may offer efficiency and can afford genetic, for example, improvements and other types of innovations, and they provide economies of scale, so making Blue Foods more affordable and accessible, hopefully. But of course, they can squeeze out small producers. And as I mentioned before, these small-scale actors represent a big diversity in both species produced and production modes, and maintaining this diversity is important as a source of material for genetic improvements we might need in the future, but also as a foundation for resilience of the Blue Food production system. And of course, there's tensions between sustainability and nutrition. This is perhaps familiar to many of you in the audience today, but achieving sustainable aquaculture expansion means reducing reliance on wild fish for feed. But as we use new feeds based on plant-based ingredients and recycled animal processing wastes, like chicken fat, for example, that may reduce nutritional value of fish produced and inadvertently increase its environmental footprint. So the development of alternative feeds that combine lower environmental footprint with high nutritional quality is what's going to be super important to achieve both sustainable and nutritious blue foods as we go forward. Now, the diversity of blue foods and the diversity in their contribution to human health, environmental pressures, livelihoods, economies, it means it's very hard and not probably desirable to try and provide broad recommendations. Each country, each actor will have its own path. But what the Blue Food Assessment still tries to do is distill 5 elements which are broad enough to be relevant to blue food transformation in a majority of contexts. First one is that we need to manage blue foods as an integral part of the food system by, for example, ensuring effective coordination across all the ministries that attempt to deliver food systems goals. We also need to identify and reform policies and practices that now are impeding transformation, like reforming or redirecting subsidies. We need to protect and harness this diversity that I've spoken about that can provide nutrition, accessibility, and environmental sustainability in the face of what we know is going to be an uncertain future. We also need to recognize and support the central role of small-scale actors. This means creating investment vehicles to support local innovation, entrepreneurship, and markets, and particularly for women and youth. And we need to commit to human rights in policy and in practice. And again, this means empowering women, indigenous groups, or other marginalized groups in every part of the blue food value chain. This has been a very high-level summary of the Blue Food Assessment. And if you're interested in finding out more detail or reading the individual papers, please visit the bluefood.earth, where you can also find a number of these policy briefs that were geared towards different audiences. But for now, thanks for your attention, and I look forward to hearing thoughts and reflections from our panel members.
Hello everyone, my name is Funke Shisha. I am the owner of Immoral Farms Nigeria Limited and Immoral Farm Stores. Aquaculture has made a difference in my life because it's a source of income for me and employment for others that work with me. You should eat more fish because fish is good for your health, it's good for your heart and your brains. So when next you're going for your grocery shoppings, make sure you have more fish in your basket. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Isla. I'm the Fisheries and Aquaculture Manager at Co-op. We're seeing increasing interest from customers around the climate impact of food. I think historically a lot of the conversation has been around meat and dairy, but seafood has a really positive story to tell. If it can show evidence of being more climate friendly as a protein, I think that's something that customers would really respond to and are looking for in the future.
Malawi being one among the least income generating countries in East Africa, the people of Malawi has always resorted to make Malawi for fish, which has been a staple food for millennia. But things have changed since last decade and the fish landings have dropped by half. So fish being one of the major sources of livelihood and food, the development of the blue food is critical for the revival and survival of people in Malawi.
Hello, this is Precious Sanjama, and I'm just Precious from Malawi. So the sector really plays great roles in affording nutrition and economic benefits in rural areas. But more importantly, the sector is used as a way of restoring fish species.
Hi there, Malcolm Dixon here. I've worked across a range of countries where blue foods are really important, including countries like Egypt and Bangladesh. And I've noticed over that time the growing importance of aquaculture. The opportunities that it presents in terms of business opportunities, both for large-scale and small-scale businesses. That might be feed companies or it might be fish farmers. But aquaculture is very dynamic, and this rapid expansion depends really on profitability. This means it's really important to understand what's going on, and to do that you really need to do your homework, as every situation is different. So I welcome this Blue Food Assessment as a means to further that goal. Thank you.
My name is Ifejuku Precious Tajidere. Aquaculture has been a very wonderful business for me. Aquaculture has helped me to be able to empower a lot of people around me, a lot of youths, a lot of women are in the business, and they are all happy to be part of the business.
Yes.
People love our fish.
I'm Arlene Yetes at Pornvanit. Aside from being considered as producers and workers, small-scale fishers and fish farmers in Southeast Asia are also consumers of fish. The type, quality, and price of fish they consume might vary from those consumed outside the region, and oftentimes fish is the only cheapest animal protein they can afford. And as consumers, their gender-specific needs, issues, and concerns should also be taken into consideration.
Hello, my name is Benjamin Lamera, a fish farmer. I'm here what is supposed to be a fish market. What we can see now is that it's very difficult. It's becoming harder and harder to capture. So I'm involved in fish farming, actually, and low-cost feed production to change that situation. Aquaculture has made a difference in my life and the life of many in my country. Now, I'm currently developing a black soldier fly-based, local-made fish feed to bring down the cost of fish feed, which is currently unsustainable in Angola and in most of Africa.
Hello, and thanks for tuning into this brief.
Well, thanks very much indeed for all our video diarists there. Really appreciate those contributions to today, and of course to Beatrice Kroner for her laying out really what the Blue Food Assessment's done. So the role of the speaker panel discussion and Q&A, which now follows, is to broaden out debates that have been raised by the BFA rather than being a critique or agreeing with the outcomes of the assessment. And so to introduce the panel, we have Jimmy Turnbull, who's a qualified vet. He's a professor at the University of Stirling, where he leads the Aquatic Animal Health and Welfare Group. Neil Stevens, who is a senior lecturer in technology and society at the University of Birmingham, where as a sociologist, he's worked on innovation in biotechnology and food, including cultured meat. Jasper Scholten is a principal consultant at Blonk in the Netherlands, where his focus is environmental and sustainability issues of food. Ronnie Tan is based in Malaysia and works for a variety of organizations, including the US Grains Council, Callista, and BSAF in the region. And finally, Nana Roos, who's an associate professor in international nutrition at the University of Copenhagen. So welcome all. You each have a few minutes to speak to a question I'm going to address to you. So first of all, let's kick off with Jimmy. Jimmy, the One Health approach is widely accepted and used to understand the risks and benefits of sustainable production and development. Does it have any value in the context of Blue Foods?
Thanks, Dave, and thanks to the previous speaker. That was really interesting and helpful. Basically, the One Health concept is a very old idea. It's the idea that the human, the domestic animal, and the ecosystem health are all linked together. They're inseparable. And it's very similar in many respects to the pillars of food security, sustainability, or carrying capacity. There's overlapping concepts in there. And it's definitely not a new idea. It goes, well, Aristotle and Hippocrates wrote about it, but it's the basis of the belief system of many indigenous peoples. So it's a very old idea. Recently, it's been slightly hijacked by zoonosis, especially with SARS coming from bats. The health link between animals and humans has been, on everybody's mind. But it's much more than just cutting down habitat and displaced rodents, giving people Lassa fever. It's about trying to maintain health in this complex interactive system. And for me, Blue Food is just one aspect of One Health in the context of aquatic systems. We've heard how it's really important to increase the efficiency of food utilization in aquaculture. And the best way to improve food utilization efficiency is to keep the animals alive. Your feed conversion ratio is rotten if they die. So I think what we've got to do in this whole context of blue food is not just think about the humans and the ecosystems, as we've heard about already. We've got to remember the welfare and the health of the animals that are involved in the system as well. I'm not sure if that's close to my 3 minutes or not, Dave.
That's great. And thanks for those thoughts. Yeah, I think that's a great summary. And I'd like Nana Ruse, as a human nutritionist, perhaps to add to that. Perhaps you have some thoughts on that as well.
Well, yes, thank you. I'm shut off for my camera. I don't know what happens. It's cut off by the host, it says. So I will talk out of the blue here.
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, that's good. Okay, let me see if I can get it on. No, I can't. Well, I mean, One Health, as we hear, is that it's about programs and policies across sectors, right? And the focus has really been to achieve better public health. And we are really focused a lot on the on reducing risk. But I think with the aquatic and the blue food, we don't have the same level of risk in terms of disease transmission. So I think we have a window to expand the health view to be more on, say, well, how can we actually, how could we find positive pathways to promote better, promote better human health through, for example, better nutrition. So we could set this benchmark across the sector to that every single ton of aquatic foods which is landed, it should be optimal for good human health. And we could really prevent a lot of malnutrition. We could save a lot of lives. We could improve the quality of life, like for pregnant women, from better development and school performance for children, as we have on the presentation by Beatrice Krohn. So I really think we have an opening here to expand the One Health paradigm to across the sectors, really to look into the positive pathways to release the potential for better human health.
Thanks, Nana. So a real differential there in that perhaps aquatic foods give a new opportunity here for rethinking about One Health in a slightly more, in a positive way, as well as of course through the risk assessment process. Thanks for that. So I'd like to move to Neil, and with obviously your sociologist hat on, could you perhaps explain to us what alternative protein sources are, why they're being developed, and what impacts they might have on the broader food, including blue food sector? Thanks very much. Hello, Neil, are you there?
That's what happens when you forget to turn off your mute.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, please. So, yeah, alternative proteins is a sector that's been really active, growing in all kinds of interesting ways over the last 5-10 years, and this includes in the fish space. You know, there's generally kind of 3 different types of alternative fish products that are being developed. There's kind of the plant-based, which is where you take existing plant products to try to look and taste like fish. They're the most established. There's a relatively smaller sector working with fermentation to produce products. And then there's a group that are trying to produce what's called cultured meat. And this is something that I've been studying as a sociologist the most. And this is where you take cells from a living animal, can be a fish, into a controlled environment. You grow those cells in a media, and exactly what that media is, where you get it from, how much it costs is really important. But you expand into a larger quantity of muscle tissue, which you then prepare and sell as food. This was first legally available late last year when some chicken nuggets were sold in Singapore by a company called Just. Small quantities, and that's important to understand. This is still quite an early stage technology, and while fairly, convincing pieces of salmon or shrimp can be produced that people say taste pretty good, making it in volume is problematic. But making it in volume is important because that's really why people want to do it. The idea here is, first of all, to produce meat in a way that has lower resource use, lower greenhouse gases, lower environmental impact, meat that tastes as good and is as healthy as the same meat that you would get from killing an animal, and a way of getting meats, whether that's fish meats, land-based meats, without killing animals or killing a significantly lower number of animals. But there are some real challenges in doing it. Of course, there's this issue of, can it be done at scale cheaply enough? Can it be done with low enough energy use? Open questions, technical questions, we don't know. There's issues of whether people will want to eat it. A number of surveys have been done that show that generally younger people in cities who are male and educated are more likely to eat it. And certainly there are enough people out there who seem willing enough to try it for the early stage of the sector. And then there's the issue of, what is its impact? What is its impact on the global food system? You know, a lot of people talk about this as a way of diversifying the protein portfolio. For others, it's about absolutely closing down animal-based sectors and essentially removing industrial fish production entirely and replacing it with this system. No one is anywhere close to that, but there's a very interesting set of motivations coming through, and we'll see where it develops. I think someone's meant to follow me.
I think that we lost Dave.
Yeah. Oh, was Ronnie supposed to speak after me? I don't know.
I can actually.
Yeah,
while we're waiting for Dave to come back, I'd like to share a slightly different perspective of developing alternative protein ingredients for feed. And this is mainly for the importance of feed security, and it's in addition to food security. To support this, I want to give I'd like to share with you three incidences. The first one is that just after Chinese New Year in the year 2020, China went into its full lockdown, and China imports 100% of its premium fish meal. There was a shortage in fish meal, and prices skyrocketed, and shrimp feed producers had no choice but to increase the price of their feed. The second incidence is that in the years 2019 and 2020, China imported 6 times more corn, or what the British call maize, compared to its preceding years. And this is because of the lack of feed ingredients in China itself. Now, this has had a huge impact in terms of price. In May this year, corn prices breached the level of $550 per ton. This is the highest in the past decade. So you can imagine what kind of effect that has. The last incidence is that because of COVID-19, since the fourth quarter of 2020, freight costs has gone up 5 times as well. So when you pay for a certain feed ingredient, nearly half of it goes into shipping cost. So what I'm trying to say here is that we're not looking for a replacement for certain feed ingredients or the standard feed ingredients. We're looking at supplements. And my favorites here are single cell proteins as well as insect meals. So that's all from me. Back to Dave, if he's around.
Thanks, Ronnie. That was great. I'm afraid Dave has dropped out technical issues, so I'll go ahead and ask the next question on his behalf. So moving on from that, could I ask Jesper, you work in using life cycle assessment as a tool for assessing suitability of food. Sometimes such modeling seems to be used uncritically. So what should we be aware of when comparing terrestrial and aquatic foods? Would you be able to talk to that question, please?
Yes, I can, Lisan. Many thanks. So yeah, we are performing LCAs not only on blue food, but also on animal production systems, so terrestrial animal production systems, plant-based, and we're doing that in the complete life cycle of human food. And indeed, so what we see, let's say, in the landscape of LCA, so the life cycle assessments, is when you want to compare, for instance, terrestrial animals compared to, let's say, the blue food, what's highly important is to use the same methodological principles. And in LCA, I will explain the main ones. I will explain it to you. The first one are the system boundaries. So when you're comparing animals with blue food, please do not compare, for instance, 1 kilogram of fish with 1 kilogram of live weight animal, because if you have to take into account the complete life cycle of food. So we call it a cradle to grave analysis, or an farm to fork analysis. A couple of striking examples. For instance, when you have mussels, the edible fractions of mussels is really low. So and you have to take into account what humans eat. And another typical thing, what we did not have seen in any LCA, is the edible fraction or the raw to cook fraction. For instance, animal meat can simply, the impact of animal meat can simply double due to you lose a lot of butter. So especially at the end of the life cycle of food, there are a couple of multipliers. So it's food losses, edible and non-edible food losses. One other crucial thing to take into account when you compare different food products, it's not only comparing, let's say, terrestrial with blue food, but it counts for all food products, and that's the nutritional properties. So please, for instance, you cannot compare 1 kilogram of animal meat with 1 kilogram of potatoes, because they will bring different nutrition. So please take into account the nutritional requirements. And to do that, you need to focus on the diet level. So you have to take into account the nutritional requirements of humans, and also the nutrition what is provided with the food. And some interesting examples are, for instance, the Eat Lancet study, or the Eating for 2 Degrees, which we did for WWF. And that's interesting. For instance, when you look at aquaculture in the diet of the future, for instance, in the United Kingdom, then indeed you see that aquaculture, and you take everything into account. So the edible losses, the raw to cook fraction. Then you see that the diet in the UK, that the aquaculture will multiply with 200%. So the need for aquaculture, it's indeed they have it's a positive story, I would say, and you see that, for instance, for terrestrial meat, it will decrease.
That's great, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks,
okay.
Oscar. Just so we don't go over, I wanted to ask Neil whether you might have a point to speak to that question from your expertise from alternative protein sources.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said earlier, this vision of producing a more environmentally sustainable version of fish, particularly, well, I guess for all of the alternative proteins, is a real interest. But it's a strong narrative of part of this cultured meat, the cell-based meat, whatever you want to call it, growing it from cells. And there's about 15 companies in the world right now who are working on trying to grow, make fish essentially in a controlled indoor bioreactor based system. And the environmental benefits are an ongoing claim. Now, I mean, some of those are about the negative impacts of trawling and various impacts on the ocean, but a lot of it are assumptions around kind of greenhouse gas emissions. But added to the types of uncertainties that we've just heard in life cycle analyses of known real world systems, a number of LCAs have been produced about cultured meat. But there's even significantly more levels of uncertainty there, because people are trying to model a system that simply doesn't exist, certainly doesn't exist at scale. So really what the energy inputs are, what the outputs are, where the production facilities will be based and what impact that has on their impact is all an unknown. So there's a lot of assumptions going on. Now, the LCAs that have done, some of them have been quite positive, some of them have been much less so, and it depends quite a bit on what species you look at. But I think that they're publicized quite widely, but my core message would be recognize the uncertainties that have gone on into their production. We don't know, it's an open question, and maybe that's why it's still worth exploring.
That's great, thanks, Neil. I believe Dave is back, so Dave, would you like to take the reins and move on to the next question?
Thank you for hanging in there, Susan. Yeah, my internet just went down again. Thanks for those inputs. I did get most of what Jasper said and then Neil's response as well. Perhaps we could now turn to the small scale sector and ask Ronnie, from your perspective, that I think the Blue Food Assessment suggested that the small scale sector remains important. But in what ways do you see that the corporate enterprises of the future will be the future for Blue Foods?
Thanks, Dave, for that question. I'm going to start with a caveat. I'm going to say here that both the small scale sector as well as corporate enterprises contribute to the industry. It is never a question of either us or them, and it is never us versus them either. I have to stress that the aquaculture industry is more than just farming. If you look at the value chain to get a product or a fish over to the consumer, you have to start upstream with genetics, hatchery and nursery. Then the production comes in the farm, but you need inputs in terms of feed, and you need disease mitigations as well. So then after that, it goes downstream into processing and then distribution to the consumer. And this is where the corporate enterprise or an integrated company comes onto the scene, because it provides the industry with support sectors, right? It also provides financing. I'm not talking about debt financing, I'm talking about cash flow financing. Imagine a feed company. When it sells feed, it provides the farmer anywhere between 45 days to 60 days of credit, and this certainly helps the cash flow of the small scale farmer. The second way that the corporate enterprise helps is by developing responsible and sustainable aquaculture. Some people equate small farms to sustainable aquaculture. That is totally a misconception. In Asia, we find that it is the small farms who find it very difficult to achieve the certifications, whether it is BAP, ASC, or a global GAP. Right? And the corporate sector here, the corporate enterprise here, has the responsibility to help these small farmers and small scale sector ratchet up or bring up the overall level of the industry, because a rising tide lifts all boats. And the area that we should focus here is on three areas. The first one being disease mitigation, because if you have disease out there, it's going to destroy the whole industry. The second is effluent treatment. Whatever water that is exited from a farm, it has to go somewhere, right? And the treatment is important. And the last one is moving forward. We need to look at carbon emissions and be able to help each other with our climate change as well as SDG goals. That's from my side. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks, Ronnie. Great response. I think perhaps I could turn to Jimmy to add to that, please. Jimmy, do you have some views on that?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say I agree with almost everything, or in fact, absolutely everything Ronnie just said. there's this kind of narrative going around that small is good, big is bad, and it's a fallacy. It's just completely wrong. Again, taking it back to the perspective of One Health, it's about the health and welfare of the people, the animals, and the ecosystem. And maintaining health and preventing disease is something that requires resources. And those resources are often not available to small-scale farmers. And therefore, disease in the animals remains a massive challenge to these people. I think we need to think sensibly about the use of resources. We've heard that efficient use of feed is very important to sustainability. And the worst way to waste feed, or the best way to waste feed, is for the animals to die. If they die, it's an absolute waste. And therefore, keeping them healthy is the best thing you can do to promote efficient feed use. And not to go on too long, but there's another narrative going around that a lot of wild fish goes to feed farm fish. That's another fallacy. 88% of capture fisheries goes for human consumption. 12% goes for animal feed. And aquaculture feed is only 4% of animal feed. So, it's much more complex than small is good, big is bad.
Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, great extra thoughts. And if you've not clocked it, the Q&A has gone mad. There's loads of great questions and lots of really good responses going up. So check that out. That's running alongside as people are stimulated to ask questions coming out of really what we've heard so far. We're going to go to the last question to our panel member, Nana Roos. And Nana, perhaps I could ask you how can we get the undoubted nutritional qualities of aquatic foods better understood by ordinary people, by policymakers, by food systems people? How can we do that? You're muted, I think, Nana.
Here I am. So thank you very much for this absolutely relevant question. Well, from my perspective, my research and engagement in this sector is with a focus on prevention and treatment of malnourished children. So I have been looking for always all kind of pathways to source fish into nutrition strategies in settings where this is relevant. And to start with the conclusion is that I see a need for stimulating or pushing the fisheries sector to take a stronger commitment to engage in securing that every ton of aquatic food is used for really reaching out for good human health. And well, I will just mention an example from our work in Cambodia. It could be many other examples, but Cambodia has very productive aquatic environments, and we still see a lot of malnutrition. So we have worked on different fish-based products for children to make aquatic foods more safe, aquatic foods more accessible year-round, and many other reasons. And just to draw up an example is when we developed a very specialized product. We call it the ready-to-use therapeutic food, RUTF product. It's for treatment of malnourished children. And it's really not a niche product. 11 million children every year needs treatment for severe malnutrition. And well, the point here I want to get to is that this global standard for RUTF product is that minimum 50% of the protein should come from milk, should be dairy protein. And we know dairy is fantastic for children's growth, but fish is also fantastic. And Cambodia has fish, they have no milk. So we worked with UNICEF and we showed that we can replace milk with fish in this kind of products. Fish are fantastic, good proteins, good minerals, a lot of calcium when we grind it with the bones. So the point here in the connection with the blue food sector is that we don't hear anything from the fisheries sector. We don't hear them engage in this kind of work. We don't hear the voice. We don't hear, well, here's an opportunity to bring our fantastic food resource further into the food system and the food chain. And actually, here's also an opportunity to make a difference for public health. But we see the dairy sector everywhere. They invest they engage, and they have done it for decades, for 100 years probably, and they keep investing every year. And they're everywhere, and maybe there is not always the best solution, but I can promise you they will make it the best solution. And there's no competition from, well, there are competition from other sectors. There is no competition from the fisheries sector. So my bottom line here is to expect more from the large scale and industrial scale, where the finances are to make to be more innovative on making commitments to that every single ton of aquatic food is used for the good of human health.
Thanks, Nana. Yeah, so really adding value is a key thing here, and can maybe that be led by the corporate level to do that? Jesper, can I turn to you just for a minute for a quick thought before we go to open panel discussion, please?
Yeah. So interesting. Yeah, I agree a lot with Nana, and I think when you look at an optimized diet, the dairy sector, so for instance, milk and cheese, it will not decrease a lot. So a lot of people think that dairy has quite a high impact, but it also brings quite a lot of nutrition. But so it will not affect a lot. But when you look at aquaculture, it will increase. So in the future diet. So even the storyline for aquaculture is much better than for dairy. But indeed, I don't hear the aquaculture happy about it.
So the future's bright, but maybe a bit of a reorientation by some of the major players about what can be done in terms of delivering nutrition, particularly. And actually, the first question I'd like to ask from the audience, really, that's been upvoted as being something people really want to hear about. And I think perhaps Jimmy, you can give a couple of thoughts on this. The trade-off between food security and sustainability, particularly in developing countries, where people perhaps are overfishing, etc. What can really be done to improve this situation, to make that trade-off better? In other words, how can we walk those two walks, better food security and more sustainable futures?
That's a great and very difficult question, Dave.
That's why I asked you.
I'm kind of falling back on my background and saying it is One Health. There's no simple answers to this type of problem. You have to develop solutions that take into account the three components of One Health, or, as I say, that overlaps with sustainability and carrying capacity and all the rest of it. They all have very similar concepts, but unless you develop solutions that address all three aspects, then you're always going to have a vulnerability. You're going to be a two-legged rather than a three-legged stool. I think there's questions there about in the chat about new species and developing new models that are perhaps less demanding on intensive resources. And there's been a lot of effort put into that in the past, and it actually hasn't been hugely successful. And I think at this stage, I think I point directly back to what Ronnie said, because his explanation of the components which need to come together in order to create a successful and productive aquaculture business or enterprise are complicated. And just having the biological system, or just thinking about the nutritional consequences for humans is just not enough. We need complex answers to these complex questions.
Thanks. Yeah, it's not a panacea. There's no silver bullets. Good. The next question I'd like really to adjust it to Jesper, and it really refers to this idea of conversion-free soy, so-called, soy not grown in converted forests, for example. An actual practical mitigation strategy, or is it just burden shifting? Really, because the total soy supply remains much the same. So other users will have to use soy from converted land. This idea that you don't get an out for out. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, so I think this is not this is probably not a sustainable reduction strategy. What we see is that there is a lot of discussion about the methodology behind it. There's a lot of discussion about the statistics. For instance, some crops which have land use change, they do not pop up in statistics. And so the method will change, and also the retail, they will not accept it. So the retail also understand that this is just indeed a burden shifting. So probably it will all change, and so I would not rely on a reduction strategy of just changing your source. That's
okay.
That's my answer.
Thanks very much. Now, there's a question come up that people are also very keen to ask, and I hope Beatrice Kroner is online and ready to answer this. It's a question about promoting offshore aquaculture, as there's views arguing against promoting offshore aquaculture, or marine finfish indeed, and suggesting marine finfish aquaculture's potential to deliver food security and environmental sustainability are a bit overstated. And perhaps we should be looking to freshwater systems to deliver more on food security. What's your view, Beatrice, on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but I obviously noted in the presentation, and it's because it came up as well as one of the potential sort of looking ahead in terms of how to increase aquaculture production in a sustainable way. So it came up in the Blue Food assessment, but I noted in my presentation thoughtful, and I didn't have time to unpack it. But I think it's really important. It's a great question. It is something that's being pushed, notably, well, China, among other countries, is spending a lot of money and getting a lot of investments to invest in offshore aquaculture. So we see it happening. We see that currently, probably the way that those models are being developed, the fish that's being produced is probably going to be quite costly. It's probably not going to be the affordable kind of dense nutrients that we might be looking for to really feed more people that need it. And so I think in the way that they're being rolled out right now, they don't necessarily look at like they tick all the criteria that we'd be looking for. But on the other hand, we shouldn't at this point discard any opportunity to kind of look more into what are the possibilities. But I totally agree with Wenbo, who raised it, that there are, at the moment, the jury is out, I think, and we're not by any means suggesting that this is the solution. I don't think it is, and I think very much it has to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. And like I think Jimmy or Ronnie said earlier, that this is complex. And you can't say that offshore is the solution. Offshore might be a solution in certain places, but it has to go alongside with freshwater development and freshwater aquaculture, or even maybe land-based in some contexts. That would be my answer to that.
Thanks, Beatrice, for that. And Jim has just put in the chat, there's more to food security than feeding people who don't have enough food. We also need to feed people healthy food. Yeah, exactly. A final question before we go to wrapping up, and this I'd really be interested in Ronnie's view. We've talked about the environmental impact of aquatic foods on the planet, but also they're quite vulnerable to climate change themselves. And I just wonder what your thoughts from a business perspective might be on the challenges to sustainable aquaculture systems going forward to these climate challenges.
Thanks, Dave. 2 points I need to bring up here. The first one is the farming itself. When we look at aquaculture, we need to realize that if we need to feed the increasing population of the world, the capture fisheries is not going to help us be able to feed everybody. So we do need aquaculture. There's no doubt about it. And you can't say that one is bad and the other one is good. Again, it is supplemental. You need both, right? The second thing I have to say is that when it comes to feed ingredients, and this is part of feed security, Jasper was just talking, or there was a question going to Jasper just now about soy coming in from, let's say, Brazil, where the Amazon has been cut down. Finally, you need to look for supplemental protein ingredients. And this is where we look at alternative feed ingredients like single-cell proteins, as well as insect meals. The great thing going for single cell proteins is that the footprint required is very small. It's very much like a beer factory, right? And there's one being built right now in China by Calisio. And we're looking at an investment of about $1,000 per ton of product, right? The second one is insect meals. Insect meal is very good because it uses the circular economy. Whatever waste comes out from, let's say, the sugar refinery, the beetroot processing, it goes into feeding black soldier fly larvae, for example. And this is, again, very good to, well, help with the climate change and sustainable development goals. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thanks, Ronnie. I think some people might dispute the greener than green views of alternative feed ingredients. I think if you do life cycle assessments on these, you'll see that there's more to the eye than perhaps is sometimes pushed by the people who promote them. I'd like now, though, to go to Lynette Gordon to wrap up, to give some final considered thoughts on today's meeting, and over to you, Lynette. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Dave. I'm Lynette Gordon. I'm a professor in sustainability science and also the director of Stockholm Resilience Centre. For me, it's been extremely interesting to listen into this seminar. I work a lot on food system transformation, and I think I speak for many of my colleagues also working on that, who are not directly engaged in blue foods, that we have for such a long time really treated blue foods as sort of a black box of the food system. And I think this whole presentation, the Blue Food Assessment and the discussions here highlight the big opportunities that we would miss if we don't disentangle this system. So I just want to say thanks, first of all, for conducting this assessment and then also discussing it and highlighting it as part of the solutions to a future food system. It's also been a very rich discussion. I love that it's engaged so many people also in the question and answers section here. I think what's been interesting is also to see the Blue Food Assessment really highlighting the importance of understanding the environmental issues, the health and nutrition side, and the social justice and equity side. So really bringing them together in a good way. There's been several things that come up as kind of sticky issues that we need to resolve in order to also move forward. And I think some of them that I've heard being highlighted through this seminar is around feed. How do we produce feed in the future, building on to what extent is it soy, insect proteins, new type of proteins that are being developed, and how can that help also solve some of the issues that needs to be solved into the future. The next one is around LCA data and how to assess the different changes that need to be made. There are really good discussions also around this kind of tension between food security, sustainability trade-offs, and also need to focus on health at the center, so health of people, animals, and planet. Finally, what I think really stands out is this focus on diversity of different solutions in this space, and diversity of species, diversity of nutrition, and diversity of skills and knowledge among the actors in the food system. And I think that was something you all came back to in the discussions, highlighting that in order to solve these complexities, we need to focus on diversity. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Lena, for that summing up. That's really useful. If I could just ask the panel just to turn their cameras back on for a minute, and just to thank them for their inputs today and their considered views. Both the guys on the camera and many of you who've turned your cameras on because you've been answering questions behind. I'd also like to thank everyone who participated by bringing us some video footage or posting some questions and answers. We hope that this sort of deeper dive into the Blue Food Assessment's been useful for you, and it's going to lead to some positive and proactive change in the sector going forward. And with that, I'd just like to thank everyone who's clocked in and listened today for coming along. And we hope to see you next month when we'll have another Big Fish seminar for you on another engaging topic, we hope. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you.